My name is Margaret Allen. I'm 62 years old, and I discovered my daughter had secretly charged $21,000 to my credit card to pay for her lavish wedding. When I froze the card, she told me I was ruining her life. But the real ruin came when her own fiancé discovered the truth in my lawyer's office. It's a long story, and it's one that's still a little hard to tell. It's just past 9 p.m. here in Ohio. The house is quiet, and I feel like it's finally time to get it all out. I'd love to know who's listening out there, where you're from, and what time it is in your part of the world. Maybe sharing this will help someone else feel a little less alone. The storm had passed. Outside, the last of the rain dripped from the gutters, a soft, rhythmic sound that usually brought me a sense of peace. My house, the one my late husband Richard and I had bought 40 years ago, had a way of holding me, of whispering that everything would be all right. But not tonight. Tonight, the silence felt heavy, accusatory. The air was thick with unspoken things, and the familiar comfort of my home felt like a thin blanket against a rising chill. I was sitting at the oak kitchen table, the same one where my children, Emily and Kevin, had done their homework, where Richard and I had shared countless cups of coffee over 35 years of marriage. My laptop was open, casting a pale, clinical light on my face, and the half-empty mug of chamomile tea beside it. I'd been meaning to sort through my digital photos, a task I kept putting off. It felt too much like an archaeological dig into a life that was now permanently in the past. Instead, I'd clicked on an email from my bank, a routine notification. Your monthly statement is now available. I clicked the link, entered my password, and the page loaded. And that's when I saw it. A balance that made my breath catch in my throat. A figure so ludicrous, it seemed like a typo. $21,478.32. For a moment, I was sure it was a mistake. My mind scrambled for rational explanations. It had to be fraud. Someone in another country had stolen my number. My spending habits were modest, predictable. My teacher's pension of $2,900 a month covered the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. It was enough. The life insurance Richard had left me, the inheritance that had been the final painful gift from his funeral, was my safety net. It was the quiet promise he'd made me that I would be okay, that I would be secure. It was for a new roof, for unexpected medical bills, for peace of mind. It was not for splurging. My hand trembled as I clicked to expand the list of charges. My heart started to pound, a low, painful drum against my ribs. The list unfurled down the screen, a cascade of unfamiliar names and staggering amounts. Ethereal Blooms, $4,200. The Grand Oak Pavilion, $9,500. Artisan Catering Co., $5,800. Serafina's Bounds, $1,950. These weren't random charges from some far-off country. They were local. I recognized the names from billboards and ads in the local paper. They were for a wedding, a lavish fairy tale wedding, Emily's wedding. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced. A rainy night years ago, Emily calling me in a panic. Her car, a beat-up sedan she loved, had broken down on the interstate on her way back to college. T, my car is fully back, and the EMI this month is $1,219. Could you please help me pay for it this month? I swear I'll sort it out next time. Almost every month she called me, and I can explain this maybe in another podcast. I'm just not in favor of more money being wasted. The fear in her voice had twisted my stomach into a tight knot. The next day, I'd gone to the bank and added her to my credit card as an authorized user. "This is for emergencies, sweetie," I'd told her, handing her the gleaming new card. "Real emergencies, a flat tire, a medical issue. You understand?" She hugged me, her gratitude a warm blanket,
Of course, Mom. I'd never, ever abuse it. I promise. I stared at the screen, that promise echoing in the silent kitchen, a bitter, hollow sound. This wasn't a broken-down car. This was a calculated campaign of spending, a secret invasion of my financial security, orchestrated by my own daughter. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, any explanation other than the one staring me in the face. Maybe she had a plan to pay it all back before the statement arrived. Maybe her fiancé, David, a seemingly nice young man with a decent job in IT, was covering it. I clung to that hope like a life raft in a churning sea. There had to be an explanation. My Emily, my vibrant, beautiful daughter, the one who used to pick me wilting bouquets of dandelions, wouldn't do this. Not to me. I looked up at the photo of Richard on the wall, taken on our last anniversary. His smile was warm, his eyes full of the steady kindness that had been the bedrock of my life. We had worked so hard, saved so carefully. We paid off the mortgage, built a small college fund for each of the kids, and planned for a quiet, comfortable retirement together. After he was gone, after the casseroles stopped coming and the house fell silent, that planning was all I had left of him, a final act of his love. That inheritance wasn't just money. It was his last hug, his final whisper that he was still taking care of me. And now, that legacy was being drained, transaction by transaction, for things I hadn't even known about. My hands were trembling, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I closed the laptop with a soft click, the screen going dark, but the numbers were burned in my mind, glowing like embers in the dark. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rainy night. It was the cold premonition that this wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal. And at that moment, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I still hadn't grasped the full, devastating depth of it. I thought this was about money. I was so naive. It was about a level of disregard so profound it would threaten to shatter our family forever. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach that felt like a cold, hard stone. The faint hope that it was all a misunderstanding had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind a bitter residue of reality. Sleep had been a fitful, shallow thing, punctuated by dreams of falling numbers and ringing cash registers. I decided to call Kevin first. My son, at 34, has always been the more level-headed one, the mediator, the calm center in our family's small storms. He was a high school history teacher, a job I was so proud of, and I thought, foolishly, that he would share my sense of alarm, my outrage. I dialed his number, my palms slick with a nervous sweat against the cool plastic of the phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice a little distracted, the sound of paper shuffling in the background. "Hey, Mom, what's up? I'm just getting my lesson plans together for the day." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let the tremor I felt inside creep into my words. "Kevin, I need to ask you something. I got my credit card statement yesterday."
There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear the sound of a drawer closing with a soft thud. "Oh yeah," he said, and his tone was so casual, so breezy, it was like a physical blow. "She's going all out, wants it to be perfect, you know, a day to remember." The casualness of it was a slap in the face. "Kevin, the total is over $21,000 on my card, a card she was only supposed to use for emergencies." "Right," he said, and I could almost hear him shrugging, a gesture of dismissal I knew all too well. "Well, she's your daughter, Mom, and you've got the money. Dad's life insurance and all that. It's not like you're struggling." The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. "It's not like you're struggling." He spoke of Richard's legacy as if it were a winning lottery ticket, an endless reservoir for his sister's fantasies, not the carefully constructed shield it was meant to be. "That money is for my future, Kevin, for my security. It's not a wedding fund. It's what I have to live on for the next 20 or 30 years. He sighed, a long, impatient sound that made me feel small and foolish, like a child complaining about something trivial. Mom, you always worry so much. It's just money. What matters is that Emily is happy. It's the biggest day of her life. You wouldn't want to spoil that for her, would you? My throat felt tight, a band of unshed tears constricting my words. I want her to be happy, of course I do. But this is deceitful. She didn't even ask me. She didn't even tell me. I was pleading now, my voice cracking, hoping for a flicker of understanding, of solidarity. Instead, his voice took on a slightly harder edge, an impatient tone I recognized as the prelude to him ending a conversation he found uncomfortable. Look, I've got to go. My girlfriend, Rebecca, is waiting. We can talk about this later. Just don't make a big deal out of it and upset Emily, okay? She's under a lot of stress. Before I could respond, a thought struck me, a cold spike of fear that cut through the hurt. Wait, Kevin, all this planning, the venue, the caterer, the engagement party, when are you guys planning to have it? The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't dismissive, it was heavy with guilt, thick and suffocating. He stammered, the sound of a man caught in a lie. About that. Kevin, I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. It already happened, Mom. Last weekend. I sank down into the armchair in the living room, the one Richard used to sit in to read the paper. The worn floral fabric, usually a comfort, suddenly felt cold and foreign. What? The word was a puff of air, devoid of substance. It was just a small thing, he rushed to say, the words tumbling over each other in his haste to smooth it over. At David's parents' house, really intimate. Emily said, she said you don't really like big parties and all that noise. She said she was just trying to be considerate, to save you the trouble. To save me the trouble. The lie was so elegant in its cruelty, so perfectly crafted to inflict the maximum amount of pain. It wasn't a direct exclusion, it was framed as an act of kindness. They hadn't forgotten me, they had consciously, deliberately erased me from the picture and then painted it as my own choice. I wasn't just an unconsulted bank, I was an uninvited guest to my own daughter's life. A problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be spared. I have to go, Mom, Kevin said, his voice now full of a desperate need to escape the conversation he had created. He hung up before I could find my voice, before I could form a single word of protest. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air of the dial tone. The financial betrayal was one thing. That was about money, about numbers on a page. I could call the bank, I could consult a lawyer, but this, how do you dispute being made to feel like a ghost in your own family? How do you file a report on a heart that has been quietly, methodically broken? I looked at Richard's picture again, and for the first time since his funeral, I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The worst part was, I still thought this was the bottom. I still had no idea how much further down I was about to fall. That evening, the house felt cavernous. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to be counting down to something, each chime a small hammer blow against the fragile silence. I moved through the rooms like a phantom, straightening pictures that were already straight, dusting surfaces that were already clean. I made myself a cup of tea, but the warmth of the mug did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was a coldness that came from within, a creeping frost of disillusionment. I kept replaying the conversation with Kevin, the casual dismissiveness, the calculated lie about the party, to save you the trouble. The words were a bitter refrain in my mind. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Emily. My heart gave a painful lurch, a stupid, reflexive leap of hope. For a fleeting hopeful second, I thought maybe Kevin had talked to her. Maybe she was texting to apologize, to explain, to say it was all a terrible misunderstanding. I was a fool. The message glowed on the screen, a beacon of oblivious entitlement. Hey, Mom, happy face, smiley face. Hope you're having a good night. Just a quick heads up, the caterer needs the final deposit to hold the date. It's $2,000. Can you handle it tomorrow? Thanks. Love you.
I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. The cheerful little smiley face at the end of her demand felt like a deliberate taunt. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. She hadn't spoken to me in a week, had secretly spent a fortune that wasn't hers, had excluded me from her engagement, and now she was texting me as if I were her personal assistant, her tone as casual as if she were asking me to pick up milk from the store. The love you tacked on at the end was the most insulting part of all, a meaningless pleasantry used to grease the wheels of her request. My fingers tremble as I hovered over the keyboard. I had to try one last time. I couldn't let this happen over text. I had to hear her voice. She needed to hear mine. She needed to understand this wasn't just about numbers on a screen. It was about the foundation of our relationship, which was crumbling to dust. I erased 3 different drafts before finally deciding to call. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and bubbly, full of wedding planning excitement. "Hi, Mom, did you get my text?" "I did, Emily," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I had to force the words past my throat. "We need to talk about these expenses. We need to talk about this right now." The brightness in her voice instantly vanished, replaced by a familiar, petulant sigh. It was the sound I'd heard since she was a teenager, the sound that meant I was being difficult, that I was spoiling her fun. "Oh, Mom, are we going to do this now? I thought Kevin talked to you. It's all under control." "Under control, Emily? You've charged over $21,000 to my credit card without my permission? That's not under control. In the real world, that has a different name. It's called theft." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. I had said it. "Theft? Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, her voice rising. "It's for my wedding, my one and only wedding. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and you're trying to ruin it over some money." "It's not some money, Emily. It's the money your father left me to live on. It's my security. It's all I have." My voice was rising now, too, fueled by a desperation to make her see. Then she said the words that would sever the last thread of my hope, the words that would change everything, the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. "Honestly, Mom, I think Dad would be happy to see it go to good use," she said, her voice dripping with a chilling sort of logic, as if she was the reasonable one. "It's better than it just sitting in a bank account, right? He would want me to be happy. I deserve to have a beautiful day. I deserve this. I deserve this." The entitlement, the absolute conviction that her wants superseded my needs, that her father's love was a commodity to be spent on flowers and fancy food. It was like a switch being flipped in my soul. The grief, the hurt, the confusion that had been swirling inside me for the past 24 hours suddenly coalesced into a single, hard point of clarity. The daughter I had raised, the little girl who used to make me dandelion bouquets and cry when she scraped her knee, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a person who looked at my life savings and saw nothing but an obstacle to be overcome, a resource to be exploited. I took a slow, deep breath. The storm inside me ceased. A strange, cold calm descended. "Emily," I said, and my voice was different now. The tremble was gone. It was quiet, calm, and as cold as ice. "I understand." "Good," she said, completely misinterpreting my tone as acquiescence. Her voice brightened again. "I knew you would. So you'll handle the caterer tomorrow?" "I will be handling my finances tomorrow," I replied, each word precise and deliberate. "You have a good night." I ended the call before she could respond. I placed the phone on the counter, my hand perfectly steady. The tears had stopped. The heartache had been burned away by a clean, white-hot anger. It wasn't the wild, screaming kind of anger that throws things. It was a quiet, focused resolve. She had pushed me and pushed me and pushed me, assuming I was a soft place to land. She was about to find out I was a brick wall. Richard had left me that money for my security, and I was finally, truly going to secure it. I slept soundly for the first time in days, a deep, dreamless sleep born of exhaustion and resolution. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the kitchen window, and the world outside seemed unnervingly normal. Birds were chirping, a neighbor was walking their dog, but inside me, a revolution had taken place. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances, a passive recipient of disrespect. I was the architect of my own rescue. I made a pot of coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling the kitchen, a scent of normalcy in a world turned upside down. I sat down at the table not with my laptop, but with a fresh notepad and a pen. I wasn't just making a to-do list. I was drafting a Declaration of Independence. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Reclaiming my life." My first call, at precisely 8:01 a.m., was to the credit card company. A pleasant-voiced young woman named Susan answered. I explained the situation calmly and clearly, my voice devoid of the emotion that had been churning inside me for 2 days. "Good morning, Susan. My name is Margaret Allen. I need to report a series of unauthorized charges made by an authorized user on my account, my daughter Emily Allen." "I see, Mrs. Allen," said Susan, her tone professional and reassuring. There was no judgment, only process. "Can you confirm the last charge you personally authorized?" "A grocery bill from Miller's Market for $62.14, about 3 weeks ago." I could hear the soft, rhythmic clicking of her keyboard, a sound I found immensely comforting. "Okay, and these subsequent charges for a pavilion, catering, and flowers, totaling over $21,000, were not approved by you?" "Not a single one," I confirmed, my voice firm. "I was not aware of them until I received my statement 2 nights ago." "Understood," Susan said. "Under the Fair Credit Billing Act, you are not liable for unauthorized charges. We will freeze the card immediately and open a fraud investigation. We will contest these charges on your behalf with the merchants. A new card with a new number will be mailed to you." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. The mountain of debt that had been crushing me was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a calm voice on the phone. "Thank you, Susan, thank you." It was the first step, and it was done. My second call was to a man named Arthur Davis. He'd been Richard's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. He'd handled our wills, the sale of our first home, and after Richard's passing, he'd helped me navigate the confusing maze of the estate with kindness and patience. "Margaret," he answered, his voice a warm, familiar rumble that always reminded me of Richard. "How are you doing, my dear?" "I'm afraid I'm calling on business, Arthur," I said, getting straight to the point. There was no time for pleasantries. "Of course. What can I do for you?" His tone shifted, becoming serious. I explained everything, from the credit card charges to the exclusion from the engagement party. I told him about the text message, about Emily's chilling assertion that she deserved the money. I laid it all out, the whole sordid story. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end, a silence so profound I thought the line might have gone dead. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice low and laced with a cold anger that startled me. Richard would be heartbroken. He would be absolutely incandescent with rage. "He set up that inheritance to protect you, Margaret, not to fund a princess party for a grown woman acting like a spoiled child. He wanted you to be secure, especially if he wasn't around to look after you." His validation felt like a balm on a raw wound. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was a keeper of Richard's memory. "I need to know my options, Arthur. I need to protect what's left. I feel like my own children see me as nothing more than a bank account."
You did the right thing by calling, he said firmly. "First, we need to review your will and the power of attorney documents immediately. I assume the kids are the primary beneficiaries and possibly your agents?" "They are," I said quietly. "We're changing that today. You need an agent who will act in your best interests, not their own. Second, I want to draft a formal letter to both Emily and the vendors, putting them on notice regarding the disputed charges and potential liability. We're building a legal firewall around you, Margaret. Can you come in this afternoon, say 2 p.m.? I'll be there, I said, a sense of powerlessness I hadn't even realized I was carrying beginning to evaporate. I had an ally, a powerful one. My final call was to a local locksmith, a man whose van I'd seen around the neighborhood for years. I need to have all the exterior locks on my house rekeyed, I said. It felt drastic, almost theatrical, but it was a necessary symbolic act. My son had a key. For years, that had been a comfort, a symbol of our open, trusting family. Now, it was a liability, a potential breach in my defenses. This house was my sanctuary, and I would no longer allow anyone to enter who did not respect its owner. By 9 a.m., it was all in motion. The bank was investigating, the lawyer was preparing documents, and the locksmith was on his way. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted like victory. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. I was taking the scattered, broken pieces of my trust and building a fortress. And the siege, I knew, was about to begin. The first tremor from my personal earthquake hit around lunchtime. Emily, blissfully unaware of the storm she had unleashed, was at a high-end bridal boutique called Serafina's Gowns with two of her bridesmaids. According to the credit card statement, she had already purchased her dress there. Today, she was picking out a ridiculously expensive veil, a cloud of silk and lace that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. When she presented the card, my card, the saleswoman, a thin woman with a pinched face and an air of bored disapproval, ran it through the machine. A beep. A red light. "I'm sorry, miss, it's been declined." Emily laughed. A light tinkling sound. "Oh, that's silly. Try it again. The machine must be acting up." The woman ran it again, her expression unchanging. "No, miss, it's declined. Insufficient funds or the account has been frozen." Emily's smile vanished. Her face, which had been glowing with excitement, began to mottle with patches of red. In front of her friends, in front of the disapproving saleswoman, her financial fantasy had just collided with cold, hard reality. "That's impossible," she hissed, snatching the card back. She stormed out of the boutique, her friends trailing behind her like confused ducklings, and immediately called me. I was in the garden, wearing Richard's old gardening gloves, methodically pulling weeds around my prize-winning roses. My phone, sitting on the porch rail, began to ring. I saw her name flash on the screen and felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I let it go to voicemail. I knew what she wanted, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a fight. Not on her terms. A moment later, a string of furious texts began to pour in, each one more frantic than the last. "Mom, what did you do? The card was declined in front of everyone. Are you trying to humiliate me? This is the worst day of my life. Call me back now. You are ruining my wedding. I can't believe how selfish you are. I hate you." I read the messages, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. The words that would have crushed me 2 days ago now seemed like the impotent tantrum of a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. I put the phone in my pocket and went back to my roses, yanking a stubborn thistle from the soil with a satisfying rip. The real aftershock, however, was heading for David. As the co-signer on the contracts for the venue and the caterer, a detail I was not aware of until much later, his name and number were listed right next to Emily's. With the credit card now frozen, the vendors, sensing a problem, did what any smart business would do. They called the other person on the contract. David was in a quarterly review meeting at his IT firm. He was up for a promotion to a senior project management position, a significant step up in both responsibility and salary. His boss was in the middle of praising his work on a recent project when his phone, set to vibrate on the table, began to buzz insistently. He glanced down. It was a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Annoyed, he silenced it. When the meeting ended,
He saw he had two voicemails. The first was from a man from the Grand Oak Pavilion. Mr. Peterson, we're calling about the Allen Peterson wedding. The credit card on file for the next payment has been declined. We need a new form of payment by the end of the week to hold your date. The second call was from the caterer, with a similar message. Flustered and embarrassed, David stepped into an empty office and called Emily immediately. Em, what's going on? All the wedding vendors are calling me saying the card was declined. I can only imagine the story she spun for him, a masterpiece of manipulation and half-truths, honed by years of getting her own way. She likely told him her mother was having some kind of episode, becoming controlling and jealous as the wedding approached. She probably claimed I was trying to sabotage her happiness, maybe showing early signs of dementia, and that I'd frozen the card out of spite. She's always been a bit difficult, honey, she probably whispered, her voice full of fake tears and manufactured drama. I didn't want to worry you with it. I'll handle her. Don't worry. To his credit, David loved my daughter and wanted to believe her. He wanted to be the supportive fiancé. But he was also a practical man. He was good with numbers and logic. It was his job. The story didn't quite add up. And more importantly, the bills were now his problem. He was on the hook, legally and financially. A colleague of his had just gone through a messy divorce, losing half his salary and fighting for custody of his kids. David had seen firsthand how quickly financial entanglements could ruin a life. He tried to reassure himself it was just a family squabble, a mother-daughter thing. But a seed of doubt had been planted. He saw the ambitious wedding plans, the rising costs, and for the first time, he connected them to the frantic calls from vendors and Emily's increasingly dramatic story about her difficult mother. His perfect fairy tale wedding was starting to look like a looming financial catastrophe, and he was standing right in the middle of it. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that he couldn't just trust Emily's version of events. He needed to find out the truth for himself.
That evening, just as the locksmith was packing up his tools, his work done, Kevin's car screeched into the driveway. He stormed up the walkway, his face a mask of thunder. With him was his girlfriend, Rebecca, a woman I'd never quite warmed to. She had a way of looking at our family home, at my things, with a cool, appraising eye that always made me uncomfortable. She hung back a little now, a smug, watchful expression on her face. It was clear who had wound him up and sent him here on this mission. Kevin tried his key in the new gleaming brass lock. It didn't fit. He jiggled it, then rattled the doorknob angrily. "Mom, open this door! What the hell is going on?" I opened the door, but stood blocking the entrance, my hand resting on the frame. "Hello, Kevin. You should have called first." "What is this? Why did you change the locks?" he demanded, his eyes blazing. He tried to step past me into the familiar territory of the foyer, but I didn't move. "This is my house," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I'll change the locks if I want to. You no longer have unlimited access." "This is insane!" he shouted, his voice echoing slightly in the evening air. "First, you freeze the card and humiliate Emily in front of all her friends, and now you're locking me out? Your own son? What is wrong with you?" From behind him, Rebecca chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet, a calculated dose of poison. "Your mother seems very upset, honey. Maybe she's just not used to not being the center of attention now that Emily's getting married." I ignored her, my eyes fixed on my son. This was between us. "What's wrong, Kevin, is that my trust has been broken. My savings have been treated like a public fountain. My own children lied to me and excluded me from a major family event. That is what's wrong." Kevin had the grace to look momentarily ashamed at the mention of the engagement party. His eyes flickered away from mine. But Rebecca's presence, her silent, unwavering support for his worst impulses, was too strong. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, recovering quickly, his anger rushing back in to fill the space where his guilt should have been. "It's just a party, and it's just money. You're sitting on Dad's inheritance, a small fortune, and you're begrudging your own daughter a nice wedding? What do you think Dad would say if he were here?" He gestured around at the comfortable house, the manicured lawn,
the life Richard had provided. He would want us to be happy. That was it. The invocation of his father's name, twisting Richard's love and foresight into a justification for their bottomless greed. A cold fury, clean and sharp, cut through my sadness. My voice dropped, losing all its warmth, all its maternal softness. I said, "Don't you dare," each word precise and sharp as a shard of glass. "Don't you dare presume to know what your father would want. Your father would be appalled. He worked a second job for 3 years to afford the down payment on this house. He packed his own lunch every single day. He did that to make sure I was secure. Secure, Kevin. Not to pay for a party thrown by a daughter who can't be bothered to invite me. He would be ashamed of your lack of gratitude, of your spinelessness." I looked past him to Rebecca, who was now glaring at me openly, her mask of sweetness gone. And he would have seen right through a user like your girlfriend in about 5 seconds. Rebecca gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Kevin's face turned a blotchy, furious red. "You have no right!" "I have every right," I cut him off, my voice ringing with an authority he hadn't heard from me in years. "This is my house, paid for by my husband's hard work and my own. As of today, the Bank of Mom is closed. I spoke with the bank this morning. Your access to my accounts, the joint savings account we set up for your emergency fund, is terminated. You are welcome here as my son for a visit if you call ahead like any other guest. But you are not welcome here as a dependent or as someone who thinks they have a claim on my life's savings." I could see the conflict in his eyes. A flicker of the boy I raised, the one who knew right from wrong, was battling with the man who was being manipulated and taking the easy way out. The battle was short. He chose Rebecca. He chose the path of least resistance. "Fine," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "If that's how you want it, fine. We're leaving." He grabbed Rebecca's hand, a gesture that was both protective and defiant, and stormed back to his car. He looked back once, his face a mixture of anger and confusion, before getting in and peeling out of the driveway, leaving a short, dark strip of rubber on the clean asphalt. A mark of his anger left on my property. I closed the door, the new lock clicking into place with a satisfying final thud. The sound echoed in the silent hall. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had defended my home, my finances, and my husband's memory. But in doing so, I had lost my son. The victory felt bitter and achingly lonely. 2 days passed in a tense, unnatural quiet. The house was my fortress now. But fortresses are lonely places. I spent the time in a flurry of activity, gardening until my back ached, cleaning out closets, sorting through old boxes in the attic, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from dwelling on the chasm that had opened up in our family. I found Kevin's old Little League trophies and Emily's ballet slippers. Each object was a small, sharp memory of a time when our lives had been simpler, when my love hadn't been viewed as a resource to be plundered. The call, when it came on Friday afternoon, was one I wasn't expecting. The caller ID was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another vendor, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Allen, this is David Peterson." My heart did a little flip, a nervous, unpleasant sensation. I braced myself for another onslaught of accusations, a defense of Emily's behavior, perhaps even threats of legal action. "Hello, David. I know this is a difficult time, and I'm sure you have no desire to speak with me, but I need to understand what's happening. The vendors are calling me nonstop. Emily's story it doesn't feel right. There are pieces missing. Would it be possible for me to come by and speak with you? Alone?" His request was so reasonable, so starkly different from the entitlement of my own children that it disarmed me. He wasn't demanding or accusing, he was asking. "All right, David," I said after a moment of hesitation. "You can come by this afternoon." He arrived at precisely 3 p.m., holding a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in brown paper. It was such a simple, old-fashioned gesture of respect that it almost brought tears to my eyes. It was something Richard would have done. I led him into the kitchen, the heart of my home, and offered him a glass of iced tea.
He sat at the oak table, the same place where I had first seen the devastating numbers, and looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Allen, I want to start by saying I'm sorry," he said, looking me directly in the eye. "Regardless of the details, I know this has caused you a great deal of pain, and I'm sorry for my part in that. I should have been more aware of the finances from the start." I simply nodded, waiting. This wasn't my story to tell him, not yet. "Emily told me you were struggling," he said, choosing his words carefully, "that you were angry about the wedding and trying to sabotage it. But the man from the venue said the deposit was charged to your card over a month ago, before any of us even told you about the final wedding date." He looked at me, his eyes searching for the truth. It doesn't add up. I decided then that I wouldn't try to convince him with anger or accusations. That was Emily's method. Mine would be the quiet, undeniable truth. I went to my desk in the small adjoining office and returned with two things: the printed credit card statement and a small framed photo of Richard and me, taken on the day we paid off our mortgage. I placed the statement on the table. "Here are the charges, David. As you can see, they began 2 months ago." Then I pushed the photo toward him. "And this is the man whose life savings paid for them." I told him everything, my voice quiet and factual. I told him about the emergency card, about being excluded from the engagement party, and about Emily's text demanding more money. I didn't embellish or editorialize. I just laid out the cold, hard sequence of events. Then I did something else. I told him about Richard. I told him how Richard had worked a second job for 5 years as a night watchman so we could afford the down payment on this house. I told him how Richard had meticulously managed their small investments, always saying, "This is for our future, Maggie, for your future." I pointed to the worn spot on the kitchen floor where he used to stand every morning, making coffee. I wasn't just talking about money anymore. I was talking about a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and partnership. I was showing him the true cost of those flowers and that fancy hall. David listened, his gaze shifting from the statement to the photo of Richard, then to my face. I could see a battle being waged behind his eyes, the desire to believe the woman he loved versus the undeniable evidence in front of him. He wasn't a bad person, he was just a man caught in a web of lies he was only now beginning to see. When he finished, he was silent for a long time. He picked up the statement and stared at the numbers, his engineering mind processing the data. $4,200 for flowers? He murmured, shaking his head slowly. She told me her aunt who lives out of state was a florist and was doing them as a wedding gift. He finally looked at me, his expression one of dawning horror. "I had no idea, Mrs. Allen, I swear it. She handled all the vendor communications. I just saw the total budget and trusted her." "I believe you, David," I said softly. And I did. He stood up, looking pale and shaken. I need to think. I need to verify this for myself. Thank you for speaking with me. Thank you for your honesty." He left the daisies on the table. As I watched him walk to his car, a sensible, modest sedan, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound sadness for this young man who was on the verge of discovering the true character of the woman he was about to marry. I had given him the map. Now he had to follow it to its ugly, inevitable destination all by himself. The next 2 days were the eerie calm before the storm. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence of anticipation. I knew something had to break. On Wednesday morning, I received a call from my lawyer, Arthur Davies. His voice was grim but resolute. "Margaret, I think it's time we put an end to this. I'm calling a family meeting here at my office tomorrow afternoon at 4.
I've told them it's an urgent matter regarding your estate and potential liabilities. I need you to be here, and I've made it clear that Emily, Kevin, and David must all be present. A jolt of pure dread shot through my heart. A formal confrontation in a lawyer's office felt like something from a television show. It was terrifying. "Arthur, I don't know if I can," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can. This can't be resolved with phone calls and text messages. It needs to be handled face-to-face on neutral ground with a legal witness. This is about protecting you, legally and officially. Trust me, Margaret, it's time to finish this." I spent the next 24 hours in a state of high anxiety. I barely slept. I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a simple navy blue dress and a cardigan. My teacher clothes, the ones that always made me feel more composed and authoritative. I arrived at his office the next day, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The conference room was just as intimidating as I had imagined, paneled in dark wood with a long, polished table that reflected the grim faces of the people already seated. Emily and Kevin were on one side. Emily was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though I noted they were perfectly dry. She was shooting me wounded, betrayed looks. Kevin sat stiffly beside her, his jaw tight, refusing to meet my gaze. He looked like a man being forced to attend his own execution. Then David walked in. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days. He looked older than he had just a few days ago. He didn't sit with Emily. He took a chair on my side of the table, a few seats down, and gave me a brief, grim nod. The strategic placement was a bombshell in itself. Emily's face tightened, her performance faltering for a split second as she registered the silent betrayal. Arthur entered last, carrying a thick, leather-bound folder. He sat at the head of the table, exuding an air of calm, impeachable authority. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his eyes sweeping over each of us, lingering for a moment on Emily's tear-stained face. "We're here to discuss a serious matter. A debt of $21,478 has been accrued against Mrs. Allen's assets without her consent. This is now a legal issue with potential consequences for all parties involved." Immediately, Emily launched into her performance, as if on cue. "I can't believe this! This is my own mother trying to ruin my life because she's jealous of my happiness. She's trying to take my wedding away from me. She's being cruel and vindictive." Kevin jumped in to defend her, his voice rising. "Mom, this has gone too far. This is a family matter, not something for lawyers. Just pay the bill and let's be a family again."
Arthur let them finish, his expression unreadable, his hands steepled in front of him. He let the accusations hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he opened his folder. "Before we discuss feelings," he said coolly, "let's establish facts." He slid a copy of the credit card statement across the table. "Emily, did you or did you not make these charges?" "Well, yes, but," she began, ready to launch into a justification. "No," Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp. "That was not the question. A simple yes or no will suffice for the record." "Yes," she mumbled, her voice sullen. "And did you have your mother's permission for these specific transactions?" Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading, trying to appeal to the mother she had so thoroughly taken for granted. "She always told me the card was for emergencies. This is the biggest event of my life. It felt like an emergency." Before I could even respond to that ludicrous, self-serving statement, David spoke up. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Stop lying, Emily." Emily froze, her mouth slightly open. Her head whipped around to face him. "What did you say to me?" David slid his phone onto the polished surface of the table. "I called the Grand Oak Pavilion this morning. I spoke with the events manager. You never paid them a deposit from your own savings, like you told me you did. They confirmed the only payments they have ever received were from this credit card." He looked at her, his face etched with a pain and disillusionment that was awful to witness.
Then I did something I feel terrible about, but I had to know. I logged into your bank account. You gave me the password last month when you asked me to help you budget for the wedding. He took a deep, shaky breath. Your account has been overdrawn for 2 months. You haven't just been using your mother's money for the wedding. You've been using it for everything. Your rent, your car payment, your clothes, your daily lattes. You've been lying to me about your salary, about everything. The room was utterly, devastatingly silent. The truth, stark and irrefutable, hung in the air. Emily's performance had collapsed, leaving behind the ugly, greedy reality. She stared at David, her expression shifting from disbelief to pure, venomous rage. Tevin looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his eyes wide with shock as he looked from David's phone to his sister's pale, contorted face. He hadn't just been an enabler, he'd been a fool, a willing pawn in her long-running game of deceit. The climax wasn't a shouting match. It was this terrible, damning silence. My son and daughter had been exposed, not by my anger, but by their own greed and lies. It was a victory, but it felt like a funeral for the family I thought I had. In the crushing silence of that conference room, a silence broken only by Emily's ragged breathing, I finally found my voice. I looked at my children, the 2 people I had brought into this world, and I felt a profound and weary sadness that went deeper than anger. "The money," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the polished table. "The money was never the most important thing. I would have helped you, Emily. If you had come to me, if you had been honest, we could have sat down at the kitchen table and figured out a wedding you could afford, a beautiful wedding. We could have made a plan. That's what families are supposed to do." I shifted my gaze to Kevin, who was staring at his hands, unable to look at me. "I thought you raised you to be a man of integrity, Kevin. I thought you raised you both to understand the difference between a want and a need, and the value of respect. Respect for others, and respect for yourselves." Then I turned to my lawyer, my friend. "Arthur, please proceed as we discussed. Draft the necessary documents to have this debt assigned to the person who incurred it. My husband's inheritance will not be used to pay for it. It will be used for its intended purpose, my security." Finally, I looked at David. His face was pale, but his expression was resolute. He had made his choice, and it had cost him dearly. "David," I said, softly, and I meant every word, "I am truly sorry that you were dragged into this deception. You are a good man with a good heart. You deserve honesty and a partner you can trust. Thank you for choosing to honor the truth." With that, I stood up. My legs felt a little shaky, but I stood tall. I didn't need to stay for the fallout. I didn't need to see Emily's inevitable explosion of rage or Kevin's fumbling attempts at apology. I didn't need to hear David officially call off the wedding. My part in this drama was over. I had stated the facts, I had drawn my line, and I had defended my husband's legacy. The rest was just the messy consequence of their own actions, a tangled web they would have to navigate without me. I gathered my purse, gave Arthur a grateful nod that conveyed everything I couldn't say, and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality, sealing them in with the truth I had just laid bare. Walking out of that quiet, air-conditioned building and into the bright heat of the afternoon sun felt like surfacing after being held underwater for a long time. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air filling my lungs with the scent of freedom and hot asphalt. There was no elation, no sense of gleeful revenge. There was only a quiet, hollowed-out peace. The peace of an ending. The end of the family I thought I had, and perhaps the beginning of myself. I drove home, the streets of my familiar town looking both the same and completely different. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I had walked into that office a mother who had been wronged, a victim. I walked out a woman standing on her own 2 feet, the sole guardian of her own life. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I took the little bouquet of daisies David had brought me, which I'd put in a small vase, and placed it in the center of the table. It was a small spot of brightness in the quiet house, a reminder that decency could still exist even in the midst of ugliness. Later that evening, as I was sitting on the porch watching the fireflies begin to flicker in the twilight, a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. I knew who it was. It was David. I ended it. I'm so sorry for everything. You were right. You deserve respect. Thank you for showing me what that looks like. I read the text, and this time, a single tear did roll down my cheek and splash onto my hand. It wasn't a tear of sadness or of anger. It was a tear of gratitude. In the midst of all this ugliness, a stranger had shown me the kindness and respect my own children had withheld. The battle was over. The long, slow work of rebuilding was about to begin.
The weeks that followed were quiet. Terribly quiet. The silence in the house was no longer accusatory or tense, but it was vast and empty. It was the silence of absence. Emily disappeared completely. No calls, no texts, no angry voicemails. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out of the apartment she shared with David and was staying on a friend's couch. The grand wedding was, of course, canceled. The vendors, faced with a legal letter from Arthur and a debtor with no assets, were forced to absorb their losses. Kevin sent a single, fumbling text a week after the meeting. "Mom, I'm sorry, I messed up. I didn't know." I replied with a simple, "I know." It was true. I knew he was weak and easily led, not malicious like his sister, but I also knew the road back for us, if there was one, would be long and would require far more than a text message. It would require action, and I wasn't sure he was capable of it yet. About 3 weeks after the meeting, David came by one last time. He looked thinner, the ordeal having taken its toll, but his eyes were clear. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $9,500. "It's half the cost of the venue," he explained, not meeting my eyes. "I know it's not my debt, legally, but I feel responsible. My name was on the contract. It's a matter of honor." "David, you don't have to do this," I said, trying to hand it back. The check felt heavy in my hand, heavy with his integrity. "I do," he insisted gently, finally looking at me. "My father always said a man is only as good as his word, even when it's inconvenient. Please, it will help me close this chapter." I accepted it, my heart aching for his decency. We wished each other well, a quiet, formal farewell between two people who had been drawn together by a storm and were now navigating its aftermath on separate shores. Life began to find a new rhythm, one dictated by my own wants and needs for the first time in decades. I reconnected with my neighbor Elizabeth, a sharp, funny widow who had just gone through her own painful experience helping her son through a messy divorce and custody battle. We found solace in each other's company, sharing stories over coffee on my porch, finding strength in the shared understanding that family can be the source of our greatest joy and our deepest pain. "Sometimes," she said to me one afternoon, "you have to love your children from a distance, to give them a chance to grow up." On her advice, I did something I'd never considered. I signed up for a pottery class at the local community center. The first few weeks were a disaster. My pots were lopsided, my bowls collapsed. My hands, so used to grading papers and tending a garden, felt clumsy and useless. But I kept going. There was something therapeutic about taking a shapeless, messy lump of clay and trying to create something with my own two hands. It felt like a metaphor for my life. One evening, about 6 months after the disastrous meeting at Arthur's office, I was at my pottery wheel, my hands covered in slick gray clay, completely absorbed in the process of centering a new pot. The studio door opened. I didn't look up, assuming it was another student. "Mom?" The voice was quiet, hesitant, unfamiliar in its lack of demand. I stopped the wheel, the soft whirring sound dying away, and looked up. It was Emily. She looked pale and worn, her clothes simple, her face devoid of makeup. She was a shadow of the vibrant, demanding woman she had been. She stood there for a long moment, just inside the doorway, as if afraid to come any further. She said, I got a second job, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Bartending on weekends. I'm paying them back. The venue, in installments. It will take years. She took a shaky breath. I'm so sorry for everything. For the money, for the lies, for everything. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. I saw the remorse in her eyes, but I also saw the long road ahead. I'm glad you're taking responsibility, Emily, I said, my voice even. That's a start. Can I come home? She asked, the question hanging in the dusty air between us, full of a childish hope. I thought for a moment, my hands still covered in wet clay. I thought about the empty guest room, the quiet house. It would be so easy to say yes, to fall back into the old patterns of mother and child. But I couldn't. That life was over. No, I said, my voice gentle but firm. That house is yours now, and this one is mine. But we can start over. We can meet for coffee. We can talk. We can try to rebuild. But it has to be on new ground, Emily, a foundation of respect, not dependence. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. For the first time in her adult life, she accepted a boundary from me without a fight. It was a tiny seed of hope. After she left, I went back to my pot. I finished shaping it, my hands moving with a newfound confidence. It wasn't perfect. It had a few visible flaws, a slight wobble at the rim where I had pressed too hard. But it was strong, it was functional, and it was beautiful in its own imperfect way. It was mine. I had made it myself, from the wreckage of what came before. And as I placed it on the shelf to dry, I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely at peace. Thank you for listening to my journey. This story is a reminder that our kindness is not a weakness, and demanding respect is not selfish. It's the foundation upon which we must build our lives. Has this story resonated with you? Have you ever felt your sacrifices were taken for granted? Or have you found the strength to draw a line in the sand? Please share your perspective and your own stories in the comments below. I'm here, and I'm listening.